I returned my husband in a wheelchair to his mother in the wilderness. And as soon as he approached the hut, he heard a strange voice from the window. Chris. I'll be waiting for you. I love you so much. He heard his name called from afar. Whose voice was that? Such a girlish, ringing voice. It was painfully familiar, but Chris couldn't remember who it belonged to. He struggled to open his eyes. His eyelids felt heavy as lead and refused to obey. His mouth was dry, and there were tubes everywhere. Where was he? It smelled of alcohol and some kind of medicine. Of course, it was a clinic. But what was he doing here? What had happened? Why did his whole body hurt? And he couldn't move his legs at all. Were they tied up or something? Mr. Nash, you're awake. That's great. A young nurse quickly approached and adjusted the blanket on his bed. Does your head hurt? What happened to me? Why does everything hurt like a tractor ran over me? I can't remember anything. Chris winced. You fell from a great height. The doctor said you were born under a lucky star. Anyone else in your place wouldn't have survived. Will I be okay? The man struggled to focus on the nurse. I can't feel my legs at all. It's too early to say. The injury is very serious. Just rest. I'll call the doctor now. Please don't worry and lie still. All right, Chris responded hoarsely. It's not like I can move, I'm barely lying here. Chris Nash sat in a wheelchair. Now this chair was his constant companion. The diagnosis was grim, paralysis of the lower limbs. The chances of recovery were slim. What to do next? Who needed him at the construction site now? He was just a helpless invalid. Live on disability benefits? Yes, that seemed like the best a miserable Chris Nash could hope for. Emily was having a hard time. Nothing in the apartment was adapted for a wheelchair-bound invalid, so she had to help her husband with everything until he adjusted. Emily worked as a secretary in court. After Chris's accident, the family income dropped significantly. It was tough, and expensive medications were needed. One day Emily came home from work much later than usual. Where have you been? Chris asked, sitting at the kitchen table, slicing lemon thinly for tea. Emily loved lemon tea after a workday. Got caught up with documents, his wife said wearily. How are you? Well, here I am, preparing lemon for your tea. Thank you, Chris. Let's have some tea and talk at the same time, Emily suggested, pressing the kettle button. What do we need to talk about? Chris was surprised, transferring the lemon slices from the cutting board to a glass plate with a butterfly in the middle. Well, I wanted to tell you that. You should go to your mom's place for now. The village air will do you good, and there will be someone to take care of you. You see how much I work. I'm always busy, and you need care. The woman poured tea into the cups. You're tired of me, right? Chris said sadly. You've had enough of your invalid husband. Chris. That's not it. I just want you to get better. It's not forever. Things change in life. We'll figure something out later. We need to save up money and equip the apartment. Understand, it's for the best. I understand, Emily. Chris slowly moved towards the exit, struggling with the wheelchair. His wheelchair wasn't of good quality. That night, Chris dreamed of the village lake where he had spent so many days of his childhood, and his youth too. Many years ago, his first night of love had been there. Chris walked along the shore, the sand tickling his bare feet. It was quiet, only occasionally did a bird cry out and then fall silent again. The lake's surface, undisturbed by even the slightest breeze, seemed to beckon him. He wanted to step into the water and immerse himself in its coolness, to dive headfirst and splash around beneath the surface. Chris walked, looking down at his feet, and suddenly noticed something colorful on the sand. He bent down and picked up a bracelet woven from threads. Where had he seen it before? Where? A slender girl's wrist, with this handmade string tied around it. Olivia Green, the girl from his past, Chris Nash's first love. He opened his eyes. Dawn was breaking outside the window. The sky was painted with the watercolors of the impending sunrise, but it had yet to light up the heavens with its rays, only awakening from the night's sleep. Chris involuntarily admired the sight. I won't argue with Emily. I'll return to my parents' home for a while, and we'll see what happens next, Chris thought, lying in bed. Emily was peacefully sleeping beside him. Chris understood that she wasn't obliged to spend her whole life taking care of an invalid husband. She was still young and could meet someone else with whom she could be happy. The man didn't blame her, but it still hurt that she was pushing him out of her life, sending him to the village to his mother. Everything was ready for departure. Emily didn't drive her husband herself, she asked her friend's husband to do it. Why won't you drive me yourself? Chris asked the day before his departure. Chris, dear, I'm swamped at work right now. I can't get away, but it's easy for Steve. He needs to go in that direction anyway. I'll come later, take a week off, and definitely come, okay? The man knew this wouldn't happen. She was saying all this so it wouldn't hurt him so much. But it hurt. It hurt a lot. The village where Chris Nash was born and raised had hardly changed. It seemed its residents were stuck in the mid-20th century. Old wooden houses, front gardens with flowers, even the water pump at the beginning of their street was still in its place. It was clearly still in use. Chris felt as if he had magically traveled back in time, where he would now likely have to live out his useless life. He tried to swallow the lump in his throat, his eyes were veiled by tears. This is how life ends at 28. Chris didn't have many things, everything fit into 2 medium-sized bags. Steve drove up to the old but still sturdy house with a fence that looked like a cone with widely spaced teeth. I'll take it from here, thanks, Steve, Chris said, transferring to his chair. Good luck, Chris. Steve shook his hand and got back behind the wheel. A few moments later, Chris was alone. He easily rolled into the yard of his house. The wheels of his chair quietly rustled on the gravel path. Chris looked around. Almost nothing had changed, even the wicker chairs were still under the canopy. The village silence was uncomfortably loud. You could hear a cricket chirping in the grass and a fly buzzing lazily somewhere. Suddenly, Chris heard a strange voice. Where was it coming from? Ah, yes. From the window of his ancestral home. I'm telling you, he's destined for you, destined, an old woman said slowly, her voice slightly creaky. Chris remembered listening to audio plays as a child. There was a narrator with a similar voice. But who was this old woman? Why was she in their house? Could his mother have decided in her old age to bring a fortune teller into the house to find out what was destined for her and what wasn't? Chris involuntarily smiled. How long had it been since he'd seen his mother, sweet and kind, who sang him lullabies and gently combed his hair with her fingers? She smelled of bread and freshly cut grass. His mother used to work in the field and bake bread at home. Oh, how long ago that was! Where had that carefree childhood gone? The time when the world seemed so big and wonderful, welcoming and joyful. Now, this world didn't seem so welcoming and joyful to grown-up Chris. How can he be destined for me if we haven't seen each other for about 8 years? He's forgotten his mother, let alone me, a ringing girl's voice replied to the old woman's prediction. It can't be. It's Olivia. Olivia. Once upon a time, they made plans for the future. He promised her he'd come back or take her with him when he went to the city for a better life. But Chris never came back. In all these years, he never visited his mother. He rarely called. In the village, the phone connection was still not great. What was Olivia doing in his mother's house? Maybe she just stopped by to visit? Suddenly, a little girl of about 7 appeared on the porch. She was wearing a pink outfit with a funny frog on the belly. Hi, the girl greeted. Are you visiting us? Hi. Why are you in that chair? Can't you walk? The girl came closer and looked trustingly into Chris's eyes. Yes, little one, I can't. I fell from a height and now. Did you fall from the moon? The girl stared at Chris. That's what Mom sometimes says. Who's your mom? Olivia? Yes. Do you know my mommy? What's your name? Yes, sweetheart, I know your mom. But I haven't seen her in a long time. Where's your father? I don't know, the girl shrugged. My name's Millie, what's yours? I'm Chris. The man smiled and gently ran his hand through the blonde hair of the girl with innocent blue eyes and pale pink lips. I'll go call Grandma. Millie disappeared into the house. Chris, son, is that you? His mother stood right in front of him. Mom, was all he could say. Son, what happened to you? Why are you in a wheelchair? What happened? Are you sick? How did you get here? Where's Emily? Why didn't you call? Mom, forgive me, Chris's voice trembled. For what, Chris? My poor child. What happened to you? Mom held his head close. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I behaved like the worst jerk. I never visited you. Why does that little girl call you Grandma? Because I am Camilla's grandmother. She's Olivia's daughter and yours. What? Chris almost choked. That can't be. Why didn't Liv tell me? She forbade me from telling you. She didn't want to distract you, as she said, from your life. She didn't want to impose or manipulate you with the child. Oh my God. Chris buried his face in his hands. Why did it all happen like this? Why? Olivia came out to see the old woman off. She glanced at Chris and muttered, I told you, he's destined for you, your beloved. Liv pressed her hands to her chest and for a few seconds couldn't say a word. Hi, Liv, Chris tried to smile. It's me. Chris? My God. You haven't been here for so many years. What did they do to you in that city of yours? Olivia came very close and looked into his eyes, just as Camilla had done a moment ago. Let's go inside, Mom fussed. Chris, where are your things? By the gate, Mom, Chris replied briefly and couldn't help but admire Olivia. She was still young and fresh. Her light green sundress fit beautifully on her almost girlish figure. My charm bracelet broke for a reason, the young woman murmured almost to herself. What? Chris didn't understand. When you left, I made a charm bracelet and wished for us to meet again. All these years it didn't break, and now, snap. It broke. It means the wish should come true. They were eating meat with vegetables. Chris felt like he had gone back to his childhood. For a moment, he even imagined that he was healthy again. That he could get up and run. Are you going to live with us now? Camilla suddenly broke the silence. Well, yes, Chris replied, biting into a piece of cornbread with appetite. Are you really my dad? The girl asked, her curious eyes fixed on Chris. Millie. Olivia scolded her strictly. Liv, don't scold Millie. She's right. Yes, darling, I'm your dad. You know, I only found out about it myself today. Chris looked at his daughter with tenderness. I've missed so much. What did you miss? Millie wasn't ready to end the conversation. Millie, eat quietly, Olivia said sternly, pushing the plate closer to her. It will get cold and won't be tasty. I'm not going to reheat it 100 times, eat. My dear girl, I missed your first steps, your first words. I didn't play with you all these years. Chris spoke with such sadness in his voice that Barbara, his mother, had tears in her eyes. She discreetly wiped them away with the back of her hand and warmly smiled first at her son, then at her granddaughter. It was clear that Liv was also touched by Chris's words. She sniffled and nervously licked her lips. Chris remembered this habit of hers from their school days. His heart tightened. He had promised to come back for her as soon as he settled in the city. But he didn't return, didn't even call. What had come over him back then, so many years ago? Had Emily's beauty really turned his head so much? Yes, life had spun him in a wild dance back then. There wasn't even time to dive into his thoughts. And here his first love, Olivia Green, was waiting for him. Why hadn't she told him she was expecting a baby? This remained a mystery to Chris. They were sitting in a small gazebo behind the house, drinking a fruit drink that Olivia had learned to make so well. "Sorry to ask," Liv began, "what happened to you? Why? Why did I turn into a pathetic invalid?" Chris smirked, taking a sip from his glass. "Why do you say that?" "I just wanted to know the reason." "Okay, Liv, sorry. I've been acting like a grumpy old man lately. Remember Mr. Dahl? He always yelled at us when we accidentally threw the ball into his yard." "Of course, I remember. He would spit while yelling. It was always so disgusting to watch, you." "Exactly. What happened to him, by the way?" "When I left, he was alive and living alone. He probably would still be living and grumbling at everyone if he hadn't fallen off the stairs 2 years ago. He fell badly, hit his head on a stone. Instant death. The poor old man." Chris sighed. "You know, sometimes I think it would have been better if I had crashed when I fell from that height at the construction site." "What are you saying? How can you call for death?" Olivia made the sign of the cross. "I try not to despair, but how to live? How? Who needs me like this? I can't help or support anyone." "Well, your mother needs you, and Millie and I need you," Liv said quietly, lowering her eyes. "I waited for you so much, Chris, always hoped that the gate would open and you'd run in with a bouquet of wildflowers. But you never came." Tears rolled down her cheeks. She didn't even try to stop them. "Liv, forgive me," he placed his hand on hers. "I behaved like a jerk. But tell me, why didn't you tell me about your pregnancy? I didn't want you to be with me just because of the baby. I made a wish back then, when I found out I was expecting a baby, that if you came back on your own, everything would be fine for us, but if not, I would never tell you that Millie is your daughter. Olivia, I'm so sorry that things turned out this way. I went crazy with city life back then. And then Emily flooded in, and now, you see, she flooded out just as easily." Chris chuckled bitterly. "Did she leave you?" Olivia looked into his eyes and then quickly looked away. "You could say that." "She dumped me back at my parents' house," Chris smiled, but his eyes did not. "You know, Chris, we will get you back on your feet," Olivia said with confidence. "I believe in it. You should too. Faith, you know, can move mountains. Liv, my little bee, how much I've missed you all these years." Chris squeezed her hand. "Kiss me," the woman suddenly asked. Chris's eyebrows shot up, but then he brought his face closer to hers and kissed her. The kiss was long and very sweet. This kiss opened the chest of memories they both cherished. Chris wanted this kiss to last forever. So did his first love, Olivia. Liv was the younger sister of Bill Green, Chris Nash's classmate and best friend. At first, the boy considered her just a kid who always tagged along with her older brother. But time passed, and the awkward girl with perpetually scraped knees turned into a young woman with a mane of light blonde hair and piercing green eyes with hints of blue. Those eyes were unforgettable, they looked straight into your soul. Chris suddenly found himself thinking about how pretty his best friend's sister had become. Liv didn't flirt with him like other girls her age. Her brother's friend was also her friend. But no one knew what she wrote in her butterfly-covered notebook. And she wrote a lot. Mostly about Chris Nash. Olivia Green stood in the shade of an old tree near her house. That day she turned 16. Her hair fell over her shoulders, and the blue sundress highlighted her already well-formed figure. "Hi," she suddenly heard. In front of her stood Chris Nash with a bouquet of wildflowers and a little box in his hand. "Hello, Chris." Bill is not home, I came to see you, not Bill." Happy birthday, Liv, Chris handed her the gifts. Thank you, Chris. This is so sweet. Olivia buried her small nose in the bouquet. I love these flowers. Did you pick them yourself in the fields? Of course, silly. Do you think the forest gnome Edgar helped me? Chris laughed. What gnome Edgar? The girl asked, looking into the boy's eyes. An ordinary gnome who lives in our forest. Chris tried to speak seriously, then burst out laughing. Oh, you, Chris. Liv playfully hit him on the forehead. What's this? The red box rested on her palm. Of course, the gnome's frog. Chris laughed again. Olivia hit her friend on the forehead again and opened her gift. Inside, on a white base, lay a pendant in the shape of a black star on a velvet cord. Oh my, it's so beautiful. Olivia looked up at the boy with her lovely eyes. Her small mouth slightly opened in amazement. Chris couldn't hold back anymore. He kissed her. Liv didn't push him away. She leaned forward and returned the youthful kiss. The boy felt her heart beating as fast as his own. He didn't want it to end. Let's be together, Chris whispered, pulling back a little from the girl. She didn't answer, just closed her eyes and offered her lips again for an even sweeter kiss. That kiss stamped her heart with taken by Chris Nash. The entire village gossiped that as soon as Olivia Green turned 18, she would marry Chris Nash. The most interesting part was that Chris and Olivia never mentioned it to anyone. They hadn't even discussed getting married between themselves. Only Olivia's strict father wasn't happy about this union. He didn't know how to be happy at all. Chris, after finishing school, went to work at the sawmill. A tragedy struck the family. His father suddenly passed away. The doctors said it was a blood clot. Dreams of going to college shattered, and he had to help his mother support the family. At that time, 2 of Chris's cousins were living with them while their mother was in the hospital. His mother worked either in the field or in the cowshed, which belonged to a dairy factory located near their village in those years. After his father's death, the family barely made ends meet. I'm so sorry, son, that you can't go to study in the city yet, sighed his mother. It's okay, Mom. I'll have time to study, and for now, we'll live as we are. Chris didn't dream of city life like many boys his age. He even had thoughts of returning to his native village as an engineer after studying and turning it from a godforsaken place into a wonderful health resort. These were youthful dreams that were not destined to come true. Chris, I'm afraid I won't see you again, Olivia whispered, pressing close to her beloved. Come on, Liv, I'll earn some money, settle in, and then I'll come for you. We'll see how things go. Maybe we can even bring our parents to the city. I can't imagine living in the city, the girl grimaced. I'd like us to live here, in our lovely village. I want a good house, with our children running around, filling it with their happy laughter. You're something, my little bee. All the girls want to move to the city and never set foot in the village again, but you're the opposite. Yes, you're definitely not like everyone else. That's why I love you, Chris kissed the girl on the top of her head. 2 weeks after her beloved left, Olivia realized that something was wrong with her. She had just turned 18. Right after school, she got a job at the local grocery store. The owner knew her family well, so he took her on. Gina, I think I'm pregnant, Olivia told her friend when they met one day. No way. What are you going to do? Have you told Chris? No, he just left. Let him settle in the city first, and then we'll see. And your parents? You're not married yet. I don't think your father will be happy about this news. Yes, I have no idea how to tell my parents. Time passed. It became harder for Olivia to hide her condition. One day, the conversation she had been dreading with her father took place. It was a bleak autumn. It had been raining for several days, trying to soak the earth and turning it into a real mess. Olivia came back from work and found her father in the kitchen. He was quite drunk, probably after drinking with friends in a neighbor's garage. Liv took off her old raincoat and hung it close to the fire to dry it. Her dark dress clung treacherously to her already slightly rounded belly. At that moment, her father looked at his daughter. "I don't understand, Olivia, are you pregnant?" Her father never tried to choose his words when talking to his wife and daughter. Olivia was silent, instinctively covering her belly with her hands. "Answer me. Did you get involved with that loser Chris Nash?" John Green's face turned red with anger. "He is not a loser," the girl suddenly lifted her head high and calmly said. "I love Chris." "Love? And where is your Chris? How long has he been in the city? He's probably forgotten all about you." "Fool. Who's going to raise your brat now?" "Not me. I don't need an extra burden." Her father flew into a rage. Olivia's mother entered the kitchen. "What happened, John? Why are you yelling at Liv?" the woman quietly asked. Lily had always been timid and never dared to contradict her parents, and later her husband. She was afraid of him. She dedicated her entire life to this man, without even trying to change anything. He didn't allow her to work, but at every opportunity, he reproached her for living off him. John never showed love or affection to his daughter either. Since childhood, Liv had heard nothing but reproaches and scolding from her father. You raised a slut. She got involved with Nash, and now she'll bring a bastard into this house." Lily looked first at her husband in fear and then at her daughter. Olivia stood with her head held high, still covering her belly with both hands. "Look at her, covering her bastard from that loser. Get out of here." John slammed his fist on the table in fury. "Get out," he glared at Olivia with bloodshot eyes. She grabbed her coat and ran to her room. Her mother made a move to follow her. "Don't you dare go after her, or you'll end up in the trash too." "John," Lily cried, "Olivia is your daughter. Don't be so cruel to her." "What? Found your voice? Go to the cellar and bring me a bottle of wine. And don't you dare follow that tramp." The woman went to the cellar. She could never stand up to this man, never. And this time was no different. Olivia quickly packed her few belongings into 2 large bags and quietly left the house. She was lucky. Her father had fallen asleep right at the table, his head on his arms, and didn't notice her leave. Her mother was nowhere to be seen. The girl decided not to waste time and escape this horrible place, which was ironically called her home. Olivia had nowhere to go. Darkness had already enveloped the village, and lights twinkled cheerfully in the windows of the houses. Her feet led her to Barbara Nash's house. The door was open. Liv stepped inside hesitantly. "Liv, dear, what happened?" Barbara asked, peeking out from the kitchen. "Mrs. Nash. I'm sorry for coming unannounced. I have nowhere else to go." "Come in, my girl," the woman said, taking the bags. Her gaze was warm and gentle, not tormented like Olivia's mother's, not filled with anger like her father's, but very kind and warm. "My father, he kicked me out of the house." Tears rolled down the girl's cheeks. "Why did he do that to you?" Barbara took off Liv's rain-soaked coat and hung it on a hook near the small stove. Olivia was silent, stroking her rounded belly. "Oh my God, Liv. You're expecting a baby. We need to let Chris know right away." "No, Mrs. Nash, please, don't. Not now, okay? All right, as you say, just don't worry. Don't scare your little girl." "Why do you think it's a girl?" Liv was surprised. "I don't know, it just came out that way." The woman hugged Olivia and held her close. For the first time that evening, the girl felt good. "Can I stay with you for a while?" Liv asked hopefully, looking into Barbara's eyes. "Of course. You know, I feel so lonely without Chris. I'm completely alone here now. So we'll live together, and then Chris will come back. You'll get married. Everything will be all right, Liv, everything will be all right." Since then, Barbara and Olivia had been living together. Olivia continued to work in the store, while Barbara baked bread, pies, and rolls, selling them to the neighbors, and that's how they survived. One late evening, there was a knock on Barbara Nash's door. "I'll get it," said Liv, getting up from her chair. By that time, she already had a big belly. Olivia opened the door and was stunned. Her mother was standing on the threshold. Mommy, what happened?" The girl hugged her haggard mother. "Liv, baby, I'm leaving. Forgive me for not being able to protect you, for never being able to do so." Where are you going?" Olivia looked at her mother anxiously. "To my cousin's. I can't live with your father anymore. He's completely lost it. I'll settle there, and then I'll come back for you and your baby." They hugged tightly, and Lily hurried out of the house. 2 days later, Olivia's disgruntled father showed up. But now there was someone to protect the girl. Barbara looked at the man defiantly. "What do you want, John? Leave us alone." "Where's my wife?" he rasped. "You lost your wife when you first raised your voice at her, and you lost her again when you laid a hand on her. Get out of my house. If you show up here again, I'll call the police." "Those drunks at the station," he sneered. "I'll personally make sure you regret it, got it?" Barbara Nash had known how to stand up for herself since childhood. In the village, she was respected, and some even feared her. A week later, John Green went hunting in the forest and never returned. No one knew what happened to him. The local men searched but found nothing, no gun, no backpack. The old women said that John burned with his own anger, burned to the ground. The greenhouse became empty. Olivia had no contact with her mother. It was only after Camilla's birth that a letter came from her aunt. The 21st century. But this village was stuck in the mid-20th century and had no plans to wake up. There are many such villages in the world. Not everyone knows this, thinking that progress has reached every corner of the universe. The letter informed her of her mother's death. "Poor thing burned out from cancer in 3 months. It's all because of him." Olivia sobbed. "My dear girl, how I feel for you." Barbara tried to comfort her while rocking the baby. "Why didn't she leave him when I was still little?" "Why? Not all women are strong, Liv, unfortunately, not all. Your mother was afraid for you. But you're so strong," Olivia said with admiration. "I want to be like that too." "You're strong too, daughter, very strong. And you're a very good mother." These words warmed Olivia's heart. How lucky she was to have Barbara Nash in her life. Olivia lost hope that Chris would return home. Her father was right, he had long forgotten about her. He sent money to his mother every month. It was so timely, especially when Millie was born. Liv didn't want to tell Chris about the baby. Then she found out that her beloved had married some city beauty. Olivia hardly cried, as if she had no tears left. She accepted her fate and dedicated her life to her daughter. Millie grew up to be a lovely girl. At 5, she was already reading books from the old village library fluently. And she didn't need to be forced to do it, she liked it herself. "I must be lucky in something," Olivia thought, running her fingers through Camilla's blonde hair. "I was lucky with my daughter, very lucky." Liv gently moved away from Chris. It had been so long since she had kissed those lips, since she had felt his embrace. "Liv, forgive me," the man asked for forgiveness again. "I forgave you a long time ago, Chris," she replied. "You know, I never stopped loving you." "Me neither," Chris almost whispered. "I only realized it now." "What about your wife?" "Emily is more of a habit than anything else. And you're like a breath of fresh air." "Do you know anything about my brother?" Olivia changed the subject. "No, he went to the city even before me. I thought you knew where he was." "I've lost all my family," Liv sighed sadly. "Except for my daughter and Barbara, I have no one. I love them more than life itself. If it weren't for your mother, I can't even imagine what would have happened to me." They talked until midnight. They talked and couldn't stop, like a traveler who had walked for hours in the desert suddenly finds the long-awaited oasis. They found each other, not even found, but rediscovered. Chris firmly decided to escape the grip of his ailment. He didn't want to be a burden. His disability allowance was quite small. One day, he and Millie were sorting through old boxes and found a book. It showed how to weave baskets from willow. "Why don't we try to weave a basket, sweetheart?" Chris suggested cheerfully. "Let's do it. We'll give it to Mom and Grandma. They can store all sorts of things in it." "That's right." And they got to work. They soaked the willow twigs that Olivia had helped them cut in a bucket of water, waited for the right time, and started trying to weave. They didn't succeed on the first try, but by the third attempt, father and daughter had made a somewhat crooked basket. "How wonderful!" Olivia admired. "I'll take it for myself and keep my threads in it." "Liv, darling, it's crooked, ugly." "Wait, we'll make you a good one." "But it's the first one," Olivia smiled. Chris also tried to help as much as possible around the house. He even got used to chopping wood on a high stump. One evening, Olivia started a conversation. "Listen, Chris, I read in a magazine that massage can really help with paralysis like yours. Let's practice it. Liv, my little bee, you're amazing." Chris took her hand and brought it to his lips. "I love you so much." "And I love you." Chris pulled Olivia onto his lap. "Chris, we'll break your wheelchair," she giggled. "We won't break it." Chris gave his beloved a long kiss. "What are you going to do next?" the woman suddenly asked. "What do you mean?" "Well, you're still married." "Oh, that? I'll ask Emily for a divorce. I think she'll be happy." "And then?" Liv continued. "And then I'll propose to you. Will you say yes?" "Well, I don't know. I'll have to think about it," Olivia said coquettishly and burst out laughing. After some time, Chris began making very pretty baskets. Some neighbors even started buying them. Not everyone had left this remote place. There were still those who appreciated home comfort and beautiful things. The owner of the local store even offered to sell them in his shop. The income, of course, was small, but still a help for the family. Olivia never spoke in vain. If she decided to cure her beloved, she did so with great enthusiasm. She made some kind of concoctions, then soaked bandages in them and applied them to Chris's spine. Following the instructions, she gave him a full-body massage. Sometimes Chris felt a heat flow to his paralyzed legs. It lasted for just a moment, but it still gave him hope. Now, with his 3 beloved women by his side, Chris wanted to live more than ever, to live fully and happily. It was a sunny autumn day. Chris and Millie went to collect some willow. Several willows grew near the lake. The branches hung quite low, so it wasn't too hard for Chris to cut them himself. Meanwhile, Millie decided to play with the ball she had brought with her. She knew she would have to wait a long time for her father. He carefully selected the twigs needed for weaving. The red ball flew back and forth. Suddenly, Chris heard a splash. Millie had accidentally thrown her ball into the lake, quite far from the shore. "My ball," exclaimed the girl and approached the water. "Millie, don't go into the water. We'll buy you another ball. We're unlikely to retrieve this one." "With a net?" Millie whispered with a trembling voice. "I don't think so, sweetheart. Don't be upset." "But it's my favorite," the girl said plaintively. "I understand. Wait a bit, I'll finish up soon." Chris resumed his work. The willow, fine and flexible, was very much needed. He had just received an order for a couple of gift baskets for candies. 10 or 15 minutes passed. Suddenly, Chris heard another splash. The man turned around. No! His daughter was floundering in the water. She must have tried to retrieve her precious ball after all. The bottom of the lake was treacherous, pits, cold springs. Most likely, where they were, the shore dropped off sharply. The girl got scared, especially since the water was already cold. In a panic, Chris slid out of his chair and began moving towards the lake with all his might. "Don't be afraid, baby. I'm coming," he shouted to his daughter, shedding his jacket along the way. Chris swam with all his strength. His legs, paralyzed, pulled him down. But he didn't give up, not taking his eyes off his daughter. She was already starting to drown. Finally, the man reached his goal. "Millie, I'm here, stay calm," he shouted with the last of his strength, grabbed Camilla with one hand, and began to swim back to shore. It was incredibly difficult. He only had one arm at his disposal. Yes, still strong, but still just one. From fear and cold, Millie was almost lifeless. This had its advantage. She didn't cling to Chris and hinder his movement. Clenching his teeth, Chris steadily made his way to the shore. His strength was leaving him, but he wasn't going to give up. Pain. Suddenly, Chris Nash felt a sharp pain in his legs. How was this possible? For several months, his legs had been like dead. He could poke them with the sharpest needle, but felt nothing. Chris tried to move his pain-ridden legs. And, miracle, they began to move slightly. Surprised, Chris almost dipped his daughter's head into the water. He spat on the wild pain and started moving his free arm and legs with all his might. The shore. Finally, Camilla was safe. The man crawled onto the sand himself and collapsed, exhausted. He understood that there was no time to waste. Millie could get hypothermia and get sick. "Millie, dear, put on my jacket, it's there, by the wheelchair." Another surge of pain. Darkness. Chris woke up on a mattress right in the hallway of their small house. "Chris!" Olivia exclaimed. "You came too. What happened?" Chris asked, squinting from the bright light. "It's all over. Millie told us everything. Thank God, you had your phone with you and it wasn't damaged. Camilla called, thanks to our neighbor, he helped me load you into his car. Liv, I'm sorry. I told our daughter we'd buy her another ball, and she'll get her comeuppance," Olivia said sternly. "Where is she?" "She and Barbara are having tea with honey. Everything's fine. I can't leave you alone for a minute. You'll always get into something." The woman ran her hand through Chris's hair. "Liv, I felt them," he said quietly. "What did you feel?" Olivia's eyes were filled with anxiety. "My legs. I moved them in the water. They moved, can you imagine? And such strong pain. To the point of fainting. Could it be that God heard my prayers, Chris? How wonderful this is." The woman put her hand on his knee. She had pulled off his wet jeans as soon as they managed to lay him on the mattress. "I feel it, your gentle hand, Liv." The man was breathless with excitement. Olivia couldn't hold back her overwhelming joy and kissed Chris on his cheeks, forehead, and eyes. "Try to move your toes carefully," she threw back the blanket to see everything with her own eyes. Yes. They moved. I read that sometimes this happens, a sharp pain occurs because the nerves or something like that, I don't know, doesn't matter. You're going to walk. I'll fly, Liv, my bee. There will be no stupid wheelchair at our wedding. Have you thought about it? Do you agree to become my wife? Yes, I've thought about it, Olivia said quietly. No, I won't be your wife. Chris stared at her questioningly. I won't be your wife. You will be my husband, she playfully tickled Chris's foot. Do you feel it? Yes, my bee, I feel it. I love you. Are you ready to become a mother of many children? Chris, we need to raise Millie first. We will. Don't doubt it. I'll work for 3. I hope you're not planning to go back to the city? Only if we all go together, Chris Nash assured his future wife. Chris ran barefoot on the sand, trying to catch up with Millie, who was running away from him. Olivia sat in a wicker chair not far from the water, resting her hand on her already rounded belly. Barbara was watching the meat they were grilling on the portable barbecue. "That's my ball." Millie's cry came from behind the trees. She emerged, holding her red ball, which they hadn't managed to retrieve from the lake that day. Apparently, someone else had and tossed it into the bushes. "I know who got your ball," her father said conspiratorially. "Was it the forest gnome Edgar?" Olivia chuckled softly. "Exactly, my little bee." Chris lifted his daughter above him and spun her around. "The gnome Edgar. Do you know him?" She shook her head, laughing with joy and happiness. It seemed everything around was laughing and rejoicing. Rejoicing for the happy Nash family.